So welcome back to Live from the Wish House. I'm Chris Spinner, and we are continuing 1,000 Miles, my series about my journey with autism. As I said in the first episode of this series, I have a 30-year-old son, Anthony, who lives with autism, and I'm sharing this series for a few reasons. First, I love to share my personal story, how autism affected my life and how my life has affected autism. Secondly, to give hope to others who might just be starting out in this autism journey and to remind you you're not alone. And you may even find some practical tips and ideas, something you can connect with along the way. And the third reason, it's my intention that my story will inspire you to feel more empowered for whatever your struggles are in life. My story can be a reminder that whatever problems are befalling you, if you can experience some truth to power in my story, perhaps it'll influence you to find joy and gratitude hidden in your present situation. So here we go. I'm calling this next episode, The Bubble. So when we last met, I was in the throes of realizing that there was more to Anthony's inconsistent development than everyone was willing to believe, except me. I believed it. I believed there was something not quite right, and I knew we should begin to search for answers and subsequent interventions. But I must admit that at that time, I wanted to find something that we could do that was going to cure this. My mama bear instincts were at a heightened overdrive, and quite frankly, I just wanted to save my son from what I seemed to be taking him over. We were in the 2.5 to 3 year window. Trips to the playground seemed fruitless. My idea that other children could serve as role models for playing with toys and using the playground was for naught. I remember being at the Little Tot playground near our home. There was a little small climbing section with an adorable little bridge and a slide. I remember placing Anthony on the bridge, and he just stood there and cried, and the other kids seemed merciless. They just ran right past him, and of course he fell, and I scooped him up and kept reassuring him that this was fun, but he was kicking and screaming, and I felt like I was in a bubble. I mentioned in the last episode that when I was in the feeling of the bubble, it was as if I couldn't hear things clearly, and there was always ringing in my ears. I almost felt a little faint. I'm sure it was a piece of anxiety or a panic attack. But I was to be in the bubble many times in this period. There was also a sense of being alone in the struggle because as I perceived it, my husband was slowly becoming more emotionally paralyzed as it related to Anthony's development. So a little detour here. I'm a very fair person, and I would not want to speak about someone else's story, someone else's journey. I don't want to speak for someone else, but I mention this peripherally because it certainly factors into my story. And the eventual collapse of my marriage certainly informs my mindset going forward as a mom and as a woman. You don't see the obstacles coming. You can be blindsided by your own life. And I'm a manager. I manage. That's what I do. And in this kind of situation, I found myself managing the most important person, Anthony. I will also tell you that the common statistic is that 80% of marriages with a child with autism end in divorce. Because raising a child with autism can be challenging and stressful, absolutely. But I would contend there's other issues that are brought up to the surface by the challenges of autism or raising an autistic child. And those issues also contribute greatly to the breakdown of the relationship. So I often say to people when I'm telling my story that I don't mean to be flippant about the collapse of my marriage, but I don't want to get lost in a story about relationships when this is a story about autism and Anthony and our journey under that umbrella. But the collapse of my marriage is the collateral damage, if you will. Even though in my own personal life journey, it turned out for me not to be a bad thing. So one more attempt. We decided to enroll Anthony in a little 2-year-old social skills, little bit of education program. It took place in a cute little place that resembled a cottage. There was a nice director and pleasant teachers. The plan was Anthony would spend a few hours a day in the morning. Then Dad would pick up Anthony for lunch. And then after some daddy and me time, a nap, Mommy would come home and Dad would head out to his job. Now, full disclosure, I wasn't thrilled about the decision, even though I agreed. I was feeling Anthony was in need of some kind of intervention on some level. So I made the decision to send him because I think I was still in the very recesses of my mind, hoping that other children's modeling could help him. Perhaps someone not related to us could get through. Or maybe I wanted to go along with it because that was the original plan. Because not doing so would be admitting to myself that there was something wrong. I also wonder if I didn't see the sadness or the concern in my husband's eyes and hoped that saying yes, making this positive decision, could be of emotional support for him as well. Because this was 24/7 concern. What was happening to Anthony was a 24/7 concern. It was all consuming for me. Even though I was at work teaching in the day, when I look back, I was solidly pulled in two directions. I couldn't find my emotional footing. And by this time, it was 24/7 stress with a capital S and lots of time in the bubble. Whatever the reason, I said yes to the little program. On the first day, my husband said the director seemed so happy to see Anthony and willing to welcome him into the fold. But when he went back to pick him up, he could hear a loud, strange vocal noise coming from inside that he remarked chilled him to the bone because he knew it was Anthony. The teacher said it would take a couple days for Anthony to get acclimated. But by the third day, it was the director that met my husband at the door. She was pleasant and firm, and she told him Anthony just didn't belong there. She wasn't sure why, but suggested we see a specialist. Apparently, Anthony couldn't participate at all in anything the others were doing. I remember that day my husband called me at work and insisted I came home at once. And once I was home and he was relating the story to me, I think we both felt terrified, embarrassed, incredulous, protective, and panicked, all rolled into one. And when he went to work, I just held Anthony, protecting him from the monsters that were attacking his system, the monsters that were officially attacking my life. And there I was, right back in the bubble. But enough monsters. Okay, it was time to get to work. I called the county services and they sent evaluators. And although they were not at liberty to give a true diagnosis, they determined that Anthony was impaired enough to warrant daily services. So each day, a special educator or a speech and language specialist would arrive and spend an hour or so engaging Anthony. He would pour beans into a cup and they would prompt him to say cup or beans. He would draw with markers, well, scribbling actually, and he would get the markers on his hands. And I remember that my husband would be very unhappy about that. Isn't it interesting what we focus on when we're stressed and feeling out of control? Anthony also painted with watercolors on a big easel that I had purchased for him for this therapy. The specialist would encourage him to say dip when he put his brush into the water. Now, may I add that all of the encouragement to say cup or beans or dip, Anthony never said those words. He also painted with just water on the chalkboard side of the easel. This activity kept him occupied, and it also made him appear quite typical when friends came to call. It's so interesting that when you're in this phase of the journey, it matters to you how your child is perceived by others. You make little excuses for every behavior. You try to explain it all away. It almost comes naturally to you. But then you have an odd sense of betraying your child because it gives a vibe of embarrassment. You see, there's so much stuff coming to the surface. Stuff you never even knew you were dealing with 24/7. And the sessions continued. We didn't have cell phones in those days. We had pagers. Remember pagers? So several times a day, my husband would page me. I would call, and he would express concern that he didn't think anything was getting accomplished at these sessions. He didn't like the therapist there, and he didn't like that there was marker on Anthony's hands. And I think it was the hourly reminder that something was amiss with Anthony. That, coupled with the lack of skill on Anthony's part, made him feel as if the impairment was more severe. And then his constant dissatisfaction with the therapist, matched with my insistence that we continue the therapy and the constant panic mode we were living in, then somehow made me guess my decision to have the home therapy. I was in a constant circle of thoughts. I would come home from work and seeing no real progress. We would argue about continuing the program. Then I would wake up, go to work, therapist would come. Anthony would paint on the chalkboard, come home, see no real meaningful progress, argue around and around and around. In a cycle of mental anguish, I went. I was meeting with therapists, reading voraciously, working with Anthony in every spare moment. Listening to well-meaning friends tell me Anthony was going to be fine. Reaching out for support from my husband, who was becoming increasingly more distant. On it went. And more trips to the bubble. And then one day, back to the beginning. One of the therapists suggested he might do better around other children. I wanted to scream, "What?" But this time, the suggested venue was a toddler program for children with special needs. I had never thought of that. I'd had a little reprieve from the bubble. So with the help of the therapist, we enrolled him in a really wonderful program in Scarsdale, New York. The facilities were lovely, beautiful playground, kind teachers, all who thought Anthony was not only adorable, but had potential. Again, I thought I had made the right decision. And so for 2 to 3 hours a day, Anthony would be engaged with professionals and other children, and I was certain he would benefit. Actually, I was so tired at this point and looking for an answer, I kind of put myself in the mode of my worries are over. The school, I decided, was the answer that could cure, not right around the bend, but in the near future. And I got to drop him off in the morning. I started feeling like a real suburban mom. But although we stayed in the school till the end of that semester, that fantasy was also short-lived. See, I was the driving force behind searching for Anthony, for answers and help, because I believed in Anthony's potential to a fault. Now, although there was some progress in small skills and some typical activities to take part in at school, I didn't feel like I could credit all of these therapies, teachers, therapists in any real meaningful way. Anthony was now 3. He still couldn't speak.